voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
Welcome back to Hardball. If you're a regular Hardball viewer, you've seen that clip before. It's Pennsylvania House Republican leader Mike Turzay back in June 2012 admitting that Republicans saw voter ID requirements as a way of suppressing Obama voters and winning that state for Romney. And early this week, the Pennsylvania Republican Party chairman, that's this week, bragged that voter ID helped Republicans shave some points off President Obama's win last year.
Do you think all the attention drawn to voter ID affected last year's elections?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think we probably had a better election. Think about this. We cut Obama by 5%, which was big. You know, a lot of people lost sight of that. He won. He beat McCain by 10%, and he beat Romney by 5%. I think that probably voter ID had helped a bit in that.
Well, on a second day of a trial over the constitutionality of Pennsylvania's voter ID law, a statistical expert testified photo ID requirements disproportionately hurt Democrats and minorities. He said Democrats are 3 times as likely as Republicans and minorities about twice as likely as whites to lack a valid ID. Well, this is hardly confined to Pennsylvania. In the 2012 election cycle, there were at least 180 voter suppression bills introduced in 41 states, all of which were introduced by Republicans, according to Advancement Project, a nonprofit civil rights organization. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court effectively nullified the best bulwark against voter suppression, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In a hearing today on the Hill, lawmakers argued the law is still necessary. Well, Judith Brown-Dianis is director of the Advancement Project, and A.B. Stoddard is associate editor and columnist for the Hill newspaper. Judith, let's just go to the blatant stuff here. Aren't you, I know you're nonpartisan, aren't you stunned that a politician, a chairman of a party in a major state like Pennsylvania, openly giggles the fact that he's got a law that looked like it was on the books till the courts set it aside, that discouraged Democrats generally, obviously minorities in big cities, from voting, and he was thrilled that it shaved half of Obama's plurality off the ledger?
Well, the problem, Chris, with that question is you asked if I was stunned. No, I'm not stunned. They are playing our song again, Chris. We've been talking about this for the past 2 years, the GOP efforts to make sure that certain groups cannot vote, making it harder for them to vote. So, you know, we saw this admission right before the election, and now we have it again that someone has admitted that that's what this scheme was about, to target particular voters so they can't vote. And Advancement Project is in court right now taking care of this case. And, you know, here we have our experts saying that over 680,000 already registered voters wouldn't meet the ID requirements. They knew what they were doing when they passed that bill.
You know, I know that the African-American community is justified historically in the anger over the verdict down there in Sanford over the weekend, and I'm just learning from it. I'm just in a learning position on the African-American experience, especially from friends of mine who've never told me before how they've been stopped unjustifiably, have been humiliated in some cases for no reason at all except skin color and ethnicity. But I have to say, since this is my job, that politics matters too, not just the courts. And if you want to affect laws, like in Tallahassee or in Harrisburg, not just laws about voter ID, but about stand your ground and things like that, you got to get control of these state legislatures. You got to vote in midterm elections. You got to get involved politically, or the other side's going to do what it feels like doing. A.B. Stoddard, you're an expert in legislative history. Are you amazed watching these pals so flagrantly admit that what they're doing to protect the supposedly against voter corruption or cheating, openly admit they're doing it with the effect of helping their party screw the Democrats and Obama and minorities to boot?
I really think if you look at their comments and if you look at the demographic changes in many states throughout the nation, but particularly in the South, which remains the last sort of Republican stronghold, where state legislatures, because of the Supreme Court, are now free, mostly Republican controlled, to do what they want to further restrict voting. I really think this is long-term a very difficult issue for Republicans and a good issue for the Democrats. Democrats are already making this an issue as a voter turnout turnout mechanism. They will in 2014 and 2016. They're telling people they want to suppress your vote. Get an ID, get in line, make sure you get there. I think that Republicans, if they do act with this new sort of, liberation from the court decision last month to further restrict voting, and particularly in states in the South with the demographics changing because of African Americans and Hispanics populations there, are going to pay in the long term by not being able to bring those voters into the tent. It is, in my opinion, though, Chris, much harder to get the day off on Election Day, to get there if you're sick, pregnant, old, the weather's bad, to transport yourself there and wait in line than it is to get an ID. This is not something that you have to show ID to get into a lot of buildings. You have to show ID sometimes to use your credit card at Sam's Club, at Costco.
No.
It's much harder to actually get there on Election Day and get your vote cast than it is to get a voter ID.
Let me get back to Judith on that. Do you buy that or not?
I don't buy that. I mean, look, we have plaintiffs in our case in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin and in Texas, all whom have had a difficult time trying to get ID. Yeah, if you live in a big city, maybe you do have to use ID when you go into office buildings. Not everyone's going into big office buildings and getting on airplanes. A lot of elderly people have a hard time getting their birth certificate in order to get the ID. And so, I mean, this is a plan. And I agree that this is about race. This is about demographic shifts. This is about trying to have their last stand to control and have power. And so at the end of the day, yes, politics does matter, but it's who you try to target, and that's what's making it illegal. At the end of the day, Election Day is supposed to be equal. We're all supposed to have the same amount of power when we go into the voting booth.
You know what, AB, let me try another argument. I think you have a point there, because I think eventually we're going to have ID cards down the road, because I see that's the direction this is all going in. But look at how the Republicans in places like Pennsylvania have tried to change the Electoral College to go congressional district by congressional district rather than state by state. That's clearly intended to nullify the impact of the big city vote, the urban minority vote. Because if you go by CD, in Pennsylvania, you've got 23 CDs to, 13 to 5. So clearly they did that even though Obama carried the state as a whole, because you could argue because of minorities having a role to play. But they know what they're doing. And the same people that are pushing the voter ID laws are pushing the change in the Electoral College so that only the suburbans and the rural voters seem to have the clout.
Well, Chris, it comes as no surprise to you that political parties in 2013 are trying to hold and consolidate their power with whatever tools they have. Look at the House of Representatives, where Mitt Romney won more congressional districts than President Obama, but congressional Democrats won more votes than those districts. Those districts are very finely drawn to advantage the Republican Party. They have a virtual electoral lock on the House of Representatives right now. There are not enough swing seats for Democrats to compete and take back control of the House because of the way that they were written. They're not representative of the entire country in the way the election turned out last November, but they're a very different Republican Party than what we see countrywide. So it's not going to be a surprise that each party is going to use whatever tool they have available. I think long term, it is going to become more difficult for Republicans, particularly in the South, to ignore changing demographics. And I think it is also hard to argue that you go to the ballot box and you're forced to show an ID when you're not forced to run a check for buying an assault weapon at a gun show. At the same time, there are drivers. I mean, at motor vehicle departments, they offer non-drivers IDs. They are required for a lot of
I know you still have to go. You have to get on the subway. You got to go to the Department of Transportation.
If you live in Texas, you have to.
I think it's a lot harder to get to the voting booth on election night than getting that ID.
Ask people in Texas who have to travel for miles and miles to go to a DMV office to get an ID. Not true.
Anyway, I do think the Republicans are trying to diminish the vote of the African American as a citizen, take away their effective citizenship. And I hold Reince Priebus, the chairman of the National Republican Party, personally responsible for this. He has not lifted a finger to stop this effort in 41 states. Thank you, Judith Brown Dinas, for all the information. And AB started as always.